So, I wish to take you on a journey today. A journey which has impacted on my life since the day it began, and which continues to guide me, although there are turns and occasional detours on this journey. All of us have traveled in many directions and have visited many places. But there is something different about this journey. It is a journey of return. It is a voyage which began over 500 years ago, and its path is leading its passengers home. As Judas just talked about, the term Marrano became the expression which historians use to describe the Jewish victims of the Spanish Inquisition who held on to their Jewish identity while secretly carrying on Jewish traditions. For the overwhelming majority of Jews, the term Marrano was simply a phenomenon that we studied in classes of Jewish history, or that we occasionally used as another example of our people who had been oppressed in the different generations of Jewish existence. Eventually, the word Marrano was changed because it did have derogatory reference to the words pig or swine. Among the new terms, conversos, hidden Jews, secret Jews, seem to be more acceptable. Today, the most popular way to describe this group of people is in the term crypto-Jews, or anusim in Hebrew. The word anusim literally means those who are raped, implying that anusim are people who were forced to do things against their will. In this case, the anusim were forced to convert to Christianity against their will throughout the violent methods of horrible torture devices, humiliation, watching family members burned alive at the stake, execution, and eventually expulsion. When I was a rabbi in New Jersey for the first 15 years of my rabbinate, I never met one person with that background, and I never thought too much about it. My life, however, was about to change, and my journey was about to begin. On August 1st, 1986, I became the rabbi of Congregation B'nai Zion in El Paso, Texas. To this very day, I often think about how that event had transpired. I was very content being the spiritual leader of the Elmwood Park Jewish Center in New Jersey, and was getting ready to sign a new contract when I received a phone call from members of the search committee from El Paso. A former congregant from New Jersey had moved to El Paso and told the committee about me. At that point, the El Paso congregation had met 5 candidates and were not happy with any of those choices. So after a long interview on the phone, I was invited to come to El Paso and meet with the search committee of that congregation. I discussed this with my wife Sharon, who is here today and has always supported me in my career, while having her own career as a dedicated oncology nurse. We decided together to accept the invitation and see a part of America that we had never visited before. We began to research the city of El Paso and realized that we knew so very little about it. In fact, all we had ever heard about El Paso came from the Marty Robbins song. By the end of the weekend, I was offered the position, and since that day, August 1st, 1986, until this very day, my journey with the anusim began and continued to guide a good part of my life. On that very first day that I entered my new office at Congregation B'nai Zion, I received a phone call from a gentleman in Juarez who said that he needed to see me. As you may know, El Paso is on the border of Juarez, Mexico, and many residents of El Paso have businesses in Juarez and vice versa. On the phone, the man called me Rabbino, and I didn't even know what that meant. The next day he came to see me, and he told me the following story. It was actually recorded in the film, but I'd like to review it briefly. He told me that he was a Catholic, that he had observed the Catholic religion very religiously, and that he remembers that ever since he was a little boy, about 3 years old, and he was about 40 when he came to see me, that his grandmother would light candles every Friday night in a dark room of the house, 2 candles, and she'd say a prayer in a language he didn't understand. And after that prayer, they would go to have a large dinner. Well, his grandmother died 2 weeks ago, he told me. And so he asked his mother, well, this Friday night you'll come with me into the room and you'll light the candles. And she refused. And he couldn't understand why. And so he went to relative after relative after relative, and no one would agree to do this tradition. He wouldn't let go of it, so they told him to see the priest. So he went to see the priest of his congregation in Juarez, and the priest said, I know why your grandmother lit candles Friday night. He said, in fact, there are hundreds of Catholic women in Juarez, Mexico, lighting candles Friday night, and I know why they're doing it. But to tell you the truth, out of respect for your grandmother, you should see a rabbi. He said, what is a rabbi? And he explained to him what a rabbi is. Well, there are no rabbis in Juarez, and so for some reason he came to see me. I was the new person, I had just gotten there. And so he said to me, so Rabbi, tell me why I'm here. And I said, well, you know, sir, this is a Jewish custom. He turned colors. He couldn't understand. Jewish custom? Why would my grandmother be doing a Jewish custom? I explained to him the custom of lighting candles on Friday night. So then he said, well, why would my mother refuse to do it? And I said, I really don't know. I said, let me ask you a question. The grandmother that passed away, was she on was it your maternal grandmother or your paternal grandmother? He said, my paternal grandmother. I said, well, what was the tradition of your mother? He said, my mother was born in Mexico. She was Catholic her whole life. What about your father's side? Well, from his side, I know that we originated from Spain. So for one moment it clicked. And I said, did you ever hear of the Spanish Inquisition? And he had never heard of it, and I talked a little bit about it. And I said, well, there's a very good possibility that your grandmother had Jewish roots, and your mother is not interested in that. She never did. And that's the only thing I can say, sir. And he listened to me, and he said, well, could I come to your congregation? I said, sure. And he came occasionally. To this very day, this man comes every Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and he spends the entire day in the synagogue. Sometimes we acknowledge each other's presence, but he has been coming now for almost 30 years. Now 2 days later, again, I didn't think much of this incident. 2 days later, an attorney from El Paso called me on the phone and said her aunt had just died. They had a mass at the church. She was buried in a Catholic cemetery. We're all Catholics. And she said, when I came back to the house of mourning following the burial, my nieces were all sitting on low benches. All the mirrors were covered, and they were eating round foods. So I asked, I'd never seen this before. I said, why are you doing this? And they said, well, our mother, your aunt, your mother's sister, had Jewish roots. She said, you mean my mother had Jewish roots? Yeah, she did too. How come she never told me about it? I don't know. Well, what do these customs mean? We don't know. We've just been doing them. Every time there was a funeral in our home, our mother would do these traditions. So out of respect for her, we continue these traditions. So she called me to find out the meaning of these traditions. And I explained them to her. Now I'm beginning to get a little bit curious, you know? Now, the third incident happened 2 days later. This is the first week I'm in El Paso. And the cable guy comes to my house. I don't mean Jim Carrey. I mean the cable guy comes to my house. And when I left Elmwood Park, New Jersey, as a joke, my friends gave me a sign. It's still over my fireplace, and it says, Shalom Ya'al. So this cable guy says to me, are you Jewish? And I said, not only am I Jewish, I'm a rabbi. And with that, he opened his shirt, and he had this large Jewish star, Magen David, he was wearing around his neck. So he said, I am Jewish too. I said, really? And I figured I'd get a new member. I said, where do you go to shul? He says, I haven't decided yet. I said, why haven't you decided yet? He said, I just found out I was Jewish. I said, how did you find out you were Jewish? He says, about a month ago, my grandmother called all of her grandchildren, she has 10 grandchildren, into a room of her house. And we didn't know why she did this. It wasn't a birthday, it wasn't any occasion, but we all came over out of respect to her. We love her dearly. And she went under the bed and she took out a box. And in the box there were all these Jewish objects. And she said, she had 10 of them exactly. And she said, each one of these objects represents part of your history, part of my history. We have Jewish roots going back to Spain. And I was afraid that one day I might die, someone will find the box, and I don't know what they might do with it. They might throw it away, I don't know. But before that should happen, while I'm in good health, I want each one of you to choose one of these objects. And what he remembered was, after she had described them to her grandchildren, besides the Jewish star, there was a menorah, there were candlesticks, there was a Bible, which he said was in Hebrew and Ladino. There were all kinds of objects, and each one of the grandchildren took one of the objects, and he took the Jewish star. Now at this point, something reminded me of a conversation I had with my grandfather many years ago. My last name is Leon, and my grandfather's name was Morris Leon from Grodno, Poland. We were Ashkenazic Jews. But in a conversation I had with my own grandfather, we didn't call him Morris, we called him Moshe. And I said to my grandfather, I was just curious about our history. Leon is not exactly a Polish name. And he said, well, to tell you the truth, he said, my grandfather was also Moshe Leon. And his grandfather was Moshe Leon. And his grandfather was Moshe Leon. And we have Sephardic roots. And he said, one day, when you study Kabbalah, you'll hear about someone named Moshe de Leon. And he says, my great-grandfather told me we come from that family. I don't know if you know who Moshe de Leon is, but Moshe de Leon was really, in the eyes of most, the founder of Kabbalah and the author of the Zohar. So all of a sudden that clicked with me when these things started to happen in El Paso. Now, at that time, I didn't know what to do with this information, and there was a rabbi emeritus in El Paso by the name of Floyd Fearman, and he had written a book called Roots and Boots, and it was about the early settlers of the Jewish community of El Paso. So I went to see him, and I asked him about this phenomenon of crypto-Jews, and he said, to tell you the truth, that's not what I wrote about. I wrote about Jews that came from different communities and ultimately settled in El Paso. Traditional Jews all the time, in terms of their identity. He said, but I do have a friend of mine. His name is Rabbi Plotkin, and he lives in Phoenix, Arizona. Before I called Rabbi Plotkin, I used all of my connections. I called colleagues of mine in the conservative movement, the Reform movement, and the Orthodox movement from back east where I'd come from, and I asked them if they knew anything about this phenomenon. They knew about it, but no one experienced anything. I spoke to Rabbi Plotkin, and he told me that he did have some people in his community from the border of Mexico, and that some of them had come back to Judaism and he had helped them, but there weren't too many. And he said, anytime I need some help, he'll be happy to help me. So it was kind of, it was interesting to find one colleague interested in the subject. And so I began to personally explore, invite, and do outreach to some of the crypto-Jews in my community and in New Mexico, and in other places. For example, on Sukkot, I put a little ad in the El Paso Times and invited anyone with crypto-Jewish roots to come and share our Sukkot with us. And about 15 or 20 people came, and it was very nice. But then something really hit me, and it was about Tisha B'Av. The holiday of Tisha B'Av is the saddest holiday on the Jewish calendar, and we normally emphasize the destruction of the first temple and the second temple, which both coincidentally happened on the 9th day of Av. Also, of course, was the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1290, and the expulsion of the Jews in 1492 from Spain. And why the Spanish thing hit me was because my bar mitzvah, way a long time ago, my bar mitzvah, the secular day of my bar mitzvah was Columbus Day. It was on October the 12th. But the Hebrew day was the intermediate Sabbath of Sukkot, Chol Hamoed Sukkot. And I remember that the rabbi of our congregation, when he addressed me, talked about how my being a bar mitzvah in America was really a way of stamp of approval of what Christopher Columbus had done, and also how Ferdinand and Isabella had financed his trip. And I thought, gee, they're wonderful people. And then, as I become more involved in the crypto-Jewish situation, I realized that Ferdinand and Isabella were the scum of the earth. That their job on getting, on the Alhambra decree and ridding the community, the country of Jews, was something I was going to announce and be part of. So I'd heard of a man by the name of Richard Santos, who lived in San Antonio, Texas. And Richard Santos was a crypto-Jew, the only other one I met outside of El Paso, who self-published a book about his experiences. So I contacted the El Paso Times and I announced that on I will have a guest speaker, and he's going to talk about his journey from being a crypto-Jew to coming back to Judaism. And they interviewed him. There was a big article in the newspaper. Now, I don't know about this congregation, but Tisha B'Av is one of the least attended holidays for synagogues. Why? Number one, there's no food. It's a fast. People don't like to come to shul when there's no food. Number two, it's a sad day. It's a depressing day. We sit on the floor. The lights are dimmed. We read the book of Eicha, very depressing book written by Jeremiah. And it's not really, so, very few people show up. So I put this out in the big advertisement, and the story of Richard Santos was reported, inviting anyone who would like to hear this story to come to synagogue. Now, in my synagogue, we have a small chapel that seats about 150 and a large sanctuary that seats about over 500. So we set up for an extra 50 in the chapel, and people start coming to Tisha B'Av and looking, what is going on this Tisha B'Av? We're not serving anything, are we? No. And the crowd begins to, accumulate, and we decide, you know what? We better move into the sanctuary. So that night, over 300 people came to Tisha B'Av services at our synagogue. And I couldn't understand it. And then Richard Santos gave his speech. And I remembered one of his stories was about his mother baking a Mexican bread, and when she baked it in the oven, she took a piece of the dough and she threw it into the oven. That's what people do when they make challah in the traditional way. Well, after his speech, we opened up to questions and answers. Let me tell you, there weren't any questions. It was like a confessional. People were coming up and telling their stories, one right after the other. Someone who doesn't eat pork, and someone who doesn't mix milk with meat, and someone, these are all Catholics, and someone who had, when they crack an egg, they look to see if there's a blood spot. And some people who, even though Sunday they go to church, on Saturday they dress in white, or they don't go to work. And I'm going, oh my God, what's going on here? And it was an evening, I had to end the evening, or they would have been there all night. So now I'm really beginning to say, this is something incredibly interesting. And then I met one of my heroes, Dr. Stan Hortis, one of the founders of the Society for Crypto-Jewish Studies, at a conference in El Paso. And during the conference, I don't claim, by the way, I do not claim to be an academic expert on this subject. People like Judith, people like Stan Hortis, people like Benjamin Netanyahu's father, Ben-Zion Netanyahu, who I spoke to a few years before he passed away, the expert on the Inquisition, people like Chaim Bernard, people like Cecil Roth. Those are the experts. I'm not. In this regard, I'm the rabbi. And so, when I heard Stan Hortus tell his story, Stan Hortus became the state historian of New Mexico. He was a professor in New Mexico, in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And when I heard his story, what happened with him was, as soon as he became the state historian, people would come to him and they would tell him interesting things, the same way they came to me, but mine were more religious things and his were more factual. They went to their cemetery, Catholic cemetery, and they noticed in certain parts of the cemetery there were Jewish symbols and there were Hebrew lettering, and they couldn't understand why. Well, this piqued Stan's interest. He's written books about it, and he became one of the scholars, especially of the Jews of New Mexico, the crypto-Jews of New Mexico in the Southwest. So at this point already, I began to get phone calls from all over New Mexico and became known in the Hispanic world as a rabbi who will work with crypto-Jews. From that, we started in our synagogue once a month. We had a service on Friday night once a month in Ladino, Hebrew, Spanish, and English. We stopped doing that a number of years later when we had a new cantor and he wasn't his cup of tea. After that stopped, I had a very interesting personal experience. You could call it an epiphany. And I don't want you to think that I am Meshuggah, or Meshuggah, or a Meshuggah, or any of those, but I have to tell you what happened. Doing all of this work has entered my heart. And so I had an experience in which God spoke to me. Now, I don't know if God's ever spoke to any of you, but it's kind of a hard experience to describe. I can't say that God spoke to me like I'm speaking to you. I can't say it was a dream. It was an experience. And in that experience, my conversation with God was as follows. God, the Jewish people are doing quite well today. Everything that you promised Abraham and then through Moses is happening. We come to the belief in one God. We follow Tikkun Olam. We're making this a better world through our contributions to making this a better world. We have survived the Holocaust. But you know, God, you also said to Abraham that would be as numerous as the sands of the sea and the stars in the sky. No, God, we're not. What's going on here? Why not? And the answer came as follows. God said to me, he said, I did not build the crematorium, and I did not build the gas chambers, and I did not kill 6 million of our brothers and sisters, including 1.5 million children. People in the name of evil did that, and I cannot bring those people back. They are gone. But there was another evil people who in my name did horrible things as well, over 500 years ago. And they tortured my people, and they burned them alive at the stake, and they forced them to take upon themselves a change in religion that none of them wanted. And he said, those people, only a small portion actually died. The rest of them stayed alive by openly turning to a new faith, but in their hearts and in their souls, they remain the chosen people. And he said, you and I are going to work together to do this. Now, I know, I'm trying to be humble about this, and at the same time to share with you this personal experience. I cannot explain it. I can't explain it. But let me tell you what happened right after that. I asked God for a sign. Well, about 2 weeks after this experience, my secretary tells me that there were 3 people that have just come in and they must see you immediately. So I said, well, bring them in. And in walked my office a woman and her husband and her mother, an elderly woman, probably in her late 80s or 90s. And she said, Rabbi, I have to tell you something. We live in Los Angeles, California, and my mother is very old, and she will not travel by plane. So we drove from Los Angeles to San Antonio, Texas, where my son, her grandson, was graduating from college. And on the way back, when you go from Los Angeles to San Antonio, you have to go on I-10. It's the only route. She said on the way back, just a short while ago, as we drove through El Paso, my mother said to me, "You have to stop and you have to find a Jewish holy person." Now this is a Catholic family, and the daughter said, "Mom, are you okay? Is everything all right? Did you eat too much?" She said, "No, you must stop, you must stop." She stops at an exit called Sunland Park, exit 13 on I-10. And she gets off the road, stops at a gas station. "Is there a synagogue in this community?" "Yes, there's a synagogue." Comes up to my synagogue, and now they're there. And she says, "Okay, Mom, I did what you said. We're sitting in front of a rabbi. Why are we here?" So her mother says to her, "When I was a little girl, every day except Saturday, my dad, her dad, would put something on his head and something on his arm, and he would say prayers those mornings. Now when he died, he came to me," this is the old woman talking, "and he made me make him a promise. And the promise was that when he dies, even though it will be a Catholic service, when no one else is looking, you must promise me the following." And he gave her this object, and he said, "This object you will bury with me. You must promise that you will bury it with me." And she said, "Why?" And he said, "This is part of our Jewish tradition." "What Jewish tradition?" He said, "This has gone on in my family. My grandfather before me and his grandfather passed this on to me. And now I am passing this on to you. And you're going to make me a second promise. The second object, there are two, you will bury with you when you die." And she agreed to make that promise about 30 years before this event when she came to my office. And she said, "Rabbi, I have been living with this promise all these years, and I feel terrible about it because, to tell you the truth, Judaism is not part of who I am. I embrace Jesus with all my heart and soul. I am a good Catholic. I think it would be wrong if I bury this object with me. I buried the other one with him, but I think it would be wrong." And so she said, "Last night, while I was in San Antonio, I had a dream. And in the dream, my grandfather came to me and he said, if you can find a Jewish holy man who will make an agreement with you that he will take this object from you, and he promises that he will bury it with him, I will relieve you of that promise that you made to me." At which point she opened her pocketbook and she took this out and she gave it to me. And I cried because it was very emotional. I couldn't understand it. How did this happen? This woman has had this in her pocketbook for 30 years. Her daughter evidently knows nothing about it, and she gives it to me. She holds my hand. She says, "You make that promise with me so I can go home and I can die in peace." And I said, "I will." And so I have this tefillin, and I will bury this with me. Now, at that moment, the woman went to the other room, and her daughter's there. I said to her, "What's going on here?" She says, "This is the first time in my life I've ever heard this story." And she said, "I can't understand it. I don't understand it. I don't know anything about it." Now, you and I know there are hundreds of rabbis in Los Angeles. Why did this happen to me at this time? I do not know. I do not know. I just know that that too has entered my heart. About a month later, I was teaching my class. I teach a class at UTEP, as I was saying, and we were talking about Hanukkah. So I'm explaining to the kids in the class, the students in the class, all about the dreidel. And one of my students says to me, I have one of those. I said, you have one of what? I have one of those things. I said, one of what things? That thing you spin. She takes this out. This was in her pocketbook too. And I don't know, I know you know what this is, but I don't know if anyone else knows what this is. This is a game that they play in Mexico and other Spanish communities called Toma Todo, take everything. It is the same game as dreidel. I knew nothing about it, and of course there's all kinds of discussions. Again, I said I'm not an academic. The history of this object is very interesting to some people. It was interesting to me that it was in many other cultures, but part of me said, how did this happen? How does this happen? I'm talking about a dreidel, and this person has this in her pocketbook. I don't know. I just don't get it. So since that time, ladies and gentlemen, I've been all over the world, basically. I too visited Belmonte and got to meet with the Jewish community there. A number of years ago, I met a young lady from Ruidoso, New Mexico, named Sonia Loya. And Sonia Loya had been having an Anusim conference in Ruidoso. Sonia Loya returned to Judaism with me. She's in that film, by the way. And Sonia Loya and I, for the last 11 years, have had Anusim conferences here, not here, but in El Paso, Texas. A very interesting happened. On one of the conference we had 2 years ago was in Israel. And we specifically wanted to be at the Kotel on Tisha B'Av to announce to the world that the Anusim are well, and that the Anusim have not died, and while you can mourn the destruction of the temples right there in front of the Western Wall, and you can mourn the expulsion of the Jews from Spain are coming back. We are here today, and we are proud that we are here today. And 6 days later, on a holiday called Tu B'Av, on the 15th day of Av, which is a joyous occasion in Israel, it is similar to Sadie Hawkins Day, to Valentine's Day in Israel. It's when couples get married. I had the honor of performing the marriage of Sonia Loya and Carl Johnson, two crypto Jews, in front of a mural at the old Sephardic center in the old city. And in this mural is a picture of Ferdinand and Isabella, because it talks about the journey of the Jews from before 1492, ultimately to Israel, of the identity of that Sephardic center. And two Orthodox rabbis were the witnesses of this wedding. Here I am, the conservative rabbi, I performed the wedding, and I made sure that the bride and groom had their backs to Ferdinand and Isabel, if you know what I mean, to say we are alive and we are well. In 2009, you will see in the back, if you haven't picked it up, I came to a convention of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. It has a biennial convention. It was in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. On that day, my synagogue received an award for the work we do with Anusim. But more importantly, at each of these conventions, resolutions are made by different congregations and different individuals from those congregations. And those resolutions come before the committee, and the committee makes a decision whether to present them or not, whether they're in favor or not. And I made this resolution on behalf of the Anusim, and I have to tell you that it was very shaky, because mine was the only resolution that they would not vote yes or no. They were going to leave it entirely up to the assembly. And I had the opportunity to come before them and make that resolution. And let me read it to you, because it's a historic moment in the history of the Anusim and the Jewish people. It says as follows: whereas the fast day of Tisha B'Av recalls the very Hebrew date upon which the Jews of Spain were expelled from their country in 1492, and whereas many Jews were forcibly converted to Christianity publicly then, but continued to practice Judaism in secret, And whereas many of the descendants of those Jews who are called B'nai Anasim have returned formally to Judaism today, and many others are in the process of doing so, therefore be it resolved that the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism should cooperate with other arms of the conservative movement to develop and disseminate appropriate educational materials welcoming the B'nai Anasim and memorializing the Spanish Inquisition as part of Tisha B'Av observances. And be it further resolved that the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism encourages its affiliated congregations to use annual Tisha B'Av observances as an occasion to inform their members of the return of the B'nai Anasim to Judaism, to welcome them into their congregations, and to educate their members about the tragedy of the Spanish Inquisition. The resolution was passed unanimously. I tell you this because this is very important. It's the first time that a national organization representing over 700 congregations throughout the world have adopted such a resolution, not only to learn about the Inquisition, but to welcome back the Anasim to their communities. In your congregation, and that's one of the reasons I agreed to speak here, is one of those congregations that's doing that. So I wish you a Mazal Tov, and I thank you. The film that you see, Children of the Inquisition, this is just a small part of it, is a film that is being produced by Joe Lovett, who at one point was the head of, I always confuse whether it was CNN. He's very, very well known in the New York area as a terrific producer. He is filming this, he's going to be in Spain. By the way, when you saw Doreen Carvajal, who's a reporter for the New York Times and a recent author about her journey, she's been at my congregation, and Bill Carvajal is the president of our Anasim Center. They had never met before, and the Carvajal family, they're related. The Carvajal, Luis de Carvajal, was one of the victims of the Inquisition that a number of books have been written about. So this film, I believe, is really going to change the Jewish world because people are going to know about it. Let me tell you very briefly about two of my other heroes. One is Rabbi Nisan ben Avraham. Rabbi Nisan ben Avraham lived in Mallorca, and his name in Mallorca was Nicholas Aguil. And he found out about his Jewish roots one day when he was playing soccer, and he accidentally kicked someone, and they called him a chueta, which is a derogatory term in the Mallorcan dialect, and he didn't understand what it was. And the priest of the school he was going to told him it was a derogatory term for Jews. He said, why? He said, because you're from that family. And that upset him. And Nicholas began to study. Today, Rabbi Nisan ben Avraham lives in Shiloh. He has payas. He is an observant Jew. He was ordained by the chief rabbinate of Israel. And now, the group, Shavei Yisrael, Rabbi Michael Freund's group, sends Rabbi Nisan ben Avraham to Mallorca to work with crypto Jews coming back to Judaism. I will say that Rabbi Nisan has been at my conference, he's been at the Society conference, and from the time he was at my conference to today, he's now working with the Anasim. He wasn't doing that before. My other hero I want to talk about is Rabbi Juan Mejia. Juan Mejia was studying to be a priest in Bogota, Colombia. And an incident happened in his life. Very briefly, what happened, he was at a party at his uncle's house. People were drinking, and during the drinking, they started telling jokes. And one of the jokes was a derogatory joke about Jews. And Juan's uncle said, no, not my house. No jokes about Jews. And Juan couldn't understand it. And he actually, his uncle kicked the guy out that was telling the joke. So after the party, Juan went up to him and said, what's going on here? And he revealed to him his Jewish identity. Juan began to study Judaism, and he decided that it made more sense to him than what he was doing. He converted, And he is the first member of the rabbinical, he graduated and was ordained as a rabbi by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America about 4 years ago. First B'nai Anusim to reach that state by the conservative movement. His wife Abby has a congregation in Oklahoma City. He is with her, but he spends his time going to South America and working with crypto Jews there. One of my dreams was to have an Anusim center so that people could learn more about it in the Southwest. And I'm proud to say that at the end of our conference last August, we established the Anusim Center in El Paso, and it's very interesting where it's located. It's located in what was once the Holocaust Museum of El Paso. The Holocaust Museum, about 9 years ago, had a terrible fire. It didn't burn the building down, but it did destroy a lot of the artifacts inside. And so they decided to move the museum downtown, and that part of the building remained vacant. Half of the building is a Jewish family service, and that part remained vacant. And the El Paso Jewish Academy took over that building. That's our day school, and they agreed to allow us to make it into an Anusim center, where we have had incredible activity so far. We're in our infancy, but we are growing. My other dream that I haven't finished or started is my book, which for some reason I can speak about this all day long, but sitting down and writing a book is very difficult for me. I need the discipline of a Telushkin and the energy of some others. But someone is helping me, and one day it'll be finished. So my dear friends, let me remind us all that we are living at a very difficult time in the history of the Jewish people. The diminishing size of the Jewish population is a reality. If you read the Pew survey, it's almost time to close the door, because there's so much assimilation, there's so much intermarriage, and there's so much people not coming to services and things like that, that the Jewish community is doomed. But as I told Jeffrey yesterday, the Pew survey didn't talk about crypto Jews. It didn't talk about people coming back to Judaism. I think it's something that's important. So the rise of assimilation, intermarriage, and apathy among Jews, the upheaval in the Middle East, and the threat of a nuclear Iran in Israel's backdoor are all things that should concern us. So let me talk once more about the return of the Anusim. When I was studying sociology at Columbia University many years ago, I was very fascinated by the work by Marshall Sklar about the Jewish community. And one of his students wrote an article about what the world would be like if there had never been a Holocaust. And he came to the conclusion that if there was no Holocaust, there would be about 40 million Jews in the world today, which I think is quite an interesting number. Well, I was at a conference at B'chol Hashon a few years ago, and one of the speakers was an expert on statistics and was talking about because B'chol Hashon, like Kulan, goes to a number of areas throughout the world. And this gentleman, afterwards, I said, could I ask you a question? You're talking about the diminishing Jewish community, and yet there are emerging communities coming all over. Did you ever think about the number of Jews there might be in the world if there was never an inquisition? And he said, you're the first person that ever asked me the question. He said, give me some time. And about 3 weeks later, he calls me up, and he said, you know, I researched all of the experts, Netanyahu, Cecil Roth, Chaim Barnard. Depending who you read, it says that we lost between 200 million, as many as 800 million during the Inquisition. We lost. That doesn't mean that they died. That we lost to expulsion, to torture, to forced conversions, etc., etc. Actually, a small percentage actually died. And he said, my conclusion is, and it's not an empirical study, that there would be 100 million Jews in the world today. I'm not saying that that's the reality, but ladies and gentlemen, if there were 100 million Jews in the world today, Netanyahu would not have had to give that brilliant speech he gave the other day. We wouldn't have to worry about neighbors trying to destroy the Jewish state. The contributions that the Jewish world would make to peace and to advancement in medicine and agriculture and research and everything else that we do would be staggering. Tikkun Olam would probably really be Tikkun Olam throughout the world. And I'm not saying that 100 million Jews are coming back to Judaism. And I'm sure that here in Toronto and in many other places where I've spoken, the possibility of Jewish return is a non-issue. But I'm telling you that it is happening today. In El Paso, in New Mexico, in Arizona, in Israel because of people like Rabbi Michael Freund, in South America because of people like Jacques Cucacorn, in Spain and Colombia because of people like Rabbi Juan Mejia, in Mallorca because of people like Rabbi Nisan ben Avraham, in Peru because of people like Rabbi Peter Tartle. There's only a handful of rabbis that are involved in this. It is a reality. We all know, you're all preparing for Yom Ha'atzmaut. We all know the story of Herzl. If you will, it is no legend, and we will have a state of Israel. But perhaps you don't know that in 1558 there was a woman, an Anusa, a crypto-Jew by the name of Donna Gracia, who purchased the city of Tiberias from the Sultan Suleiman of the Ottoman Empire and made it a Zionistic answer before the word Zionism became a word to save Anusim. Next time you're in Israel, go visit the Donna Gracia Hotel and Museum in Tiberias and learn her story. She was really the first of the Zionists. So I'm here today not simply to tell you my story and my dreams, but to implore you to do your part to help. The continuity, the perpetuity, and the growth and the expanse of the Jewish people is in your hands as well as mine. God does want us to be as numerous as the sands of the sea and the stars in the sky, because he would not have said it if he doesn't want that. And I need your help. And the crypto Jews need your help. And God needs your help. Please contact me and support the Onisim Center of El Paso, which I believe will be responsible for changing the Jewish world forever. You can become part of history. We cannot bring back the 6 million Jews, the 1.5 million Jewish children who perished in the Holocaust, but we can, we must, and we will bring back our brothers and sisters who temporarily gave up their Jewish identity 500 years ago, but who yearning to return. The Jewish holiday most associated with the return of the Anusim is Tisha B'Av. And on that saddest day of the Jewish calendar, we read from the book of Lamentations, the book of Eicha, written by the prophet Jeremiah. The very last verse of Eicha is the cry of the Anusim today. It is the same prayer that we say when we return the Torah to the Ark. And I would like to chant that verse in the melody of a Ladino song. And I want you to listen to it. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuvam Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuvam Chadesh Yameinu Yameinu kekedem Chadesh Yameinu Yameinu kekedem. Return us, O Lord, and we shall return. Renew our days as of old. Each time we replace the Torah in our ark, and each time that we read on Tisha B'Av, that Hashivenu Adonai Alecha was written for the Anusim. The Anusim are returning to God today, and you can be part of history. Thank you very much.
years ago I saw a documentary about the Moranos in Portugal. I don't remember the name of the film. But they went to a small town. They found these people, and they practiced some Catholicism, some Judaism. They would make matzah, they would close their shutters, etc. The thing is that there were practicing Jews in Lisbon. So if these people had chosen to practice Judaism, they could have. But they wanted to hold on to this kind of, crypto-Judaism. So my question is, how difficult must it be in general, and how difficult have you found it to be to sort of take Jesus out of the equation to get these people to finally convert?
It's an excellent question, and the reality is that crypto-Jews who come back to Judaism have a lot of things that challenge them. Rejection is the biggest word I can think of, because if a person says to his family that is Christian, I want to come back to Judaism, I want to explore it, now you're giving up salvation, you're going to go to hell, etc. And I'm not exaggerating, this is a reality that I have seen. There are also some synagogues that are not terribly welcoming to people who have been practicing Christianity and say, well, I'm really Jewish. Some rabbis are not very friendly toward them, some congregants aren't very friendly toward them, and so they have to face that particular reality as well. So the answer is, it's not easy. The answer is, and each case really is individual. I just would like to share with you one experience that I had that I think is really reflective of your question. A number of years ago, I was on radio in an interfaith program with a Protestant minister, and he invited me to his church to talk about Judaism. So when the service was over, he surprised me. He gave a sermon about the Holocaust, and he said, Christians did not do enough to save Jews during the Holocaust. Interesting sermon. And he says, so Rabbi Leon, I am asking you to forgive me for what we didn't do to help Jews. So I just nodded my head and wasn't going to respond. I really didn't want to respond. It wasn't appropriate. I have not lost anyone personally during the Holocaust. It took me by surprise, but then his wife handed me the microphone. So what am I going to do? So I said to him, I can't forgive you because, number one, you had nothing to do with it. Number two, I didn't lose anyone. If you really want to do something about it, go to the Holocaust Museum and talk to somebody there, and I'm sure that they will be able to help you in that quest. So 2 days later, I invited this man to lunch, and I thought, this is a guy I could talk to. So during our lunch, I said to him, let me ask you a question. Besides the Holocaust for just one moment, what would you do if someone in your congregation said to you, I just discovered that I may have Jewish roots, and I would like to go to a synagogue to explore that? And he said, without batting his eyelash, as we're both eating our salads, he says to me, I would tell him he can't do it. And I said, why not? And he said, because it's a possibility he would give up salvation. And if he gives up salvation, I, as a minister, have the responsibility of bringing people to Jesus, and so I would not be involved in that whatsoever. And I said, I have to thank you very much for your frankness. I said that on the outside as I was choking on my lettuce. And on the inside I said to him, and on the inside I said to myself, you bigot, that's our last lunch. Now, my wife and I had an opportunity when we were in Paris several years ago to visit the Cardinal of Paris, who I think there's now a film about him, Jean-Marie Lustiger. Very briefly, Jean-Marie Lustiger's mother died in Auschwitz. And he and his sister went to a Christian school because they wanted to be teachers. Well, he converted, became, this very important person in the Catholic Church. And I thought if I could meet him, I'd like to ask him the same question. And so my wife and I, a friend of mine, a Monsignor from El Paso, arranged. We had an audience with him. I asked him the exact same question. And he said to me, if someone came to me and told me that, I would say, let God lead him on the proper path. At which point I said, you're a mensch. And he knew what that meant. And he says, I have mishpacha in California. And I go to their bar and bat mitzvahs. He said, you know, I'm the only one in the family that did this. I want you to know that. But that to me was, that really made me feel that the work that I'm doing is not going to hurt these people. They have to make the choice themselves is the answer. Yeah.
I recently met a young woman from Brazil who told me that when somebody dies, her family sit on low benches.
Okay.
She's from around Sao Paulo. So, of course, I go online and I find out that as much as 30% of the population of Sao Paulo has Jewish roots. Do you know anybody who is in touch with that population?
Yes, yesterday we spoke to him.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Culano has now a representative in Sao Paulo. His name is Daniel Schechter, and he just took a Torah to a community in Sao Paulo, and while we were having our meeting, we Skyped them and watched them dance and sing in Hebrew songs to us as they received their Torah. So I can actually put you in touch with somebody.
That's a great story. Oh, he's got the mic. I would call on you, but
in relation to those first two questions, I have another one. A number of years ago, there was, as part of the Jewish Film Festival, there was a film on the crypto Jews of Brazil. And they said at the time, I believe, that 10% of Brazilians would have Jewish roots, and it talked about people coming back to Judaism. So my question is, what has happened in the meantime as far as the obstacles for them, those who want to reclaim their Jewish roots and become Jewish, and convert back to Judaism? Because they did say there was a lot of resistance on the part of Jews.
right. Well, I don't know if you're referring to the movie The Longing. You don't remember. Because we had Gabriella Bohm who did a... See, Rabbi Jacques Kukakorn is actually born in Uruguay, but was raised in Brazil. He's a Reform rabbi from Kansas City area, and he's gone out to those communities, and in that film, that's why I think it might be the film you saw, there was a lot of resistance. When he got to the community, they wouldn't let him use the mikveh, so he had to use the ocean, etc., etc., and there was very little cooperation. And the answer is, from my friend Juan Mejia in Colombia, that yes, there is in Mexico as well. In Mexico as well, there's a lot of resistance to people who want to convert at all, let alone have Anusim background. It's a problem. I don't know exactly why it's that case, but it is a case, and it's very difficult. I wish it wasn't, but it is.
I don't either. Are you familiar with the film about the mystery of San Lecanto?
No, I'm not.
We have a huge Italian population.
But yeah, okay.
And that community itself has been subverting its Jewishness for hundreds of years, and have now, as a community, gone to Israel and are beginning to be educated in Hebrew and are taking their Judaism back to San Lecanto. They're not leaving. They're just now feeling comfortable about practicing Judaism. It's a great story. And in Kaifeng, China, the same thing. So I'm familiar with both of those communities because of what I do in my life, which is kind of interesting. But the Chinese are now also going to Israel to learn how to speak Hebrew and are going back to Kaifeng. These are not the Jews that live in Shanghai or Harbin or any of those other Jewish communities. Those are Jews that covered it up for hundreds of years.
Right.
And it's all community-based. So you're talking about situations where there are individuals who come to you who are a little bit frightened about coming out with their history. Have you ever figured out how you could get a community maybe to embrace this situation if they feel comfortable that
well,
only one?
There was a rabbi, what was his name, Samuel Lehrer from Mexico, who went out to large Hispanic Jewish communities, a conservative rabbi from Mexico City. He did get a little bit of criticism because he would actually convert hundreds, if not more, of people at a time after a very short conversion process, and you might ask, why do they have to convert? That's a second question, but you didn't ask the question, so I don't have to answer it. But yeah, there are incidents of crypto Jews coming back in large communities. It's not what I've experienced in the Southwest. Although what happens is that when one comes back, the word gets out, and others come back, and then others come back, and by the way, just this week, 2 young families have just come to my congregation to do their return. So it's continuing.
Right here.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Honestly, I'm really happy to have you here. It's an honor for me and I guess everyone else. I have a few questions.
Sure.
You mentioned that Rabbi Juan Mejia is the rabbi helping the crypto Jews in Colombia. Correct?
Yes.
And I'd like to know if I can get perhaps email address or
Sure.
anything.
Yeah.
Contact him?
Yes, we can give you.
Also, I'm also aware of, actually my story is the same as the one back there. With my research, I found out that there's a lot of people in Colombia with Jewish background, but they don't know about it.
Correct.
So I talked to this friend over the Facebook, MSN, and she was telling me how her mother told her when she was little that when someone dies, you have to cover the mirrors because it's no good to leave it uncovered, that's it.
Right.
And then she's really, and she feels Jewish, and she feels that she was kicked out of South America, and Jewish her heart, and she's really into it. But there is no history that she just knows little pieces and pieces. Another example that she was telling me how her mother told her how to make lentils better, like, how can I put it? To get insects out of lentils.
Okay.
You know how the ones are raised you throw out and eat only the ones. So a lot of things that seem so Jewish. So she's eager to have to kind of make a family tree out of her family because she feels so Jewish, and her brothers told her one time, I feel Jewish too, I don't know why. So where can this girl get that help? Like to get a family tree and perhaps know her ancestors from Spain because she feels that she was kicked out of Spain, and will she get that help from Rabbi Juan Mejia?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Rabbi Juan Mejia that question.
Or will she direct him?
She can contact him. The reality is, honestly, that evidence is very difficult to prove.
Okay.
Because a lot of records have been destroyed over the years. I mean, some people also think if their name is spelled a particular way, it's a Jewish way of spelling the name.
Okay.
Some people, by the way, check their DNA. Family tree DNA in Houston, Texas. Bennett Greenspan is one of the experts on that if people want to do something like that. I'm not the biggest fan of that because I think it's more what's in your heart than in your blood. But I know there are some people that want that as to validate what they're trying to do before they do it. But I think if you have it in your heart, you're going to do it anyway. Yeah.
Hi. I have actually a comment and then 2 questions just about the DNA because I'm actually part of that registry.
Yeah.
And one of the things that program does is it can connect you to other people if you want to make those connections, potential other family members, very distant and sometimes even close. So that's the benefit of that, in addition to what's in your heart. So the 2 questions that I have are, when you told all of those stories about the 300 people coming in and saying, and my grandmother did this, and is there been any documentation or gathering of those anecdotes? I'm curious what the prevalent stories are, what has been handed down through the 500 years, the covering of the mirrors, the sitting on the benches, and what what were the most common things? And is any work being done on gathering that information?
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done, a lot of individuals, a lot of articles that, I mean, I think if you just Google, I hate to tell people to Google, You'll find the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies is probably one of your best sources. You will find a lot of stories in their magazine, Halapid. I don't know if Kulanu has Paso will have some of the stories, and some other organizations. There are a lot of stories, a lot of common threads in all of this. Yes.
Wonderful. So my other question is, I also have heard a similar story of a friend of mine who lives in Houston, and her contractor was telling her the story about, again, a funeral, and the family sits on benches and all of that. And she said, and you must come from a Jewish background. He didn't seem to be so interested, but my question is, you're working out of El Paso, you've got people in Arizona and New Mexico and everything else. Is there some sort of, again, concerted effort of you and other clergy or other people going out in other cities like Houston to reach out and put the same kind of articles or stories in the newspapers to try and attract some of these other people who clearly, you know, if many of us have heard these anecdotal stories and just based on what you've experienced, there are really so many people out there.
Right. Well, usually what happens, as I said, there are 6 or 8 rabbis involved in this that I know of. But there are other rabbis out there that know of us. And so if there's a rabbi, I know probably most of the rabbis in Houston, and very often, I'm trying to think if there's a rabbi in Houston involved in this. I don't think so. So the rabbi in Houston would contact me and tell the story. I'm not out, you have to understand, I don't really go out to inform people and say, why don't you come back to Judaism? I'm available. I don't have the time to do that, truthfully. I mean, I don't know how I have the time right now, to be very, very honest with you. And I'm not saying that because, you know, I think I'm so great or anything. Please believe me. It's because it's just overwhelming. Plus, I have a congregation of almost 400 families, some of who are not happy that I spend so much time with Anisim, to tell you the truth.
This question up here, Danny.
Hi, compliment for being here. I'm a Jew that goes all the way back to Abraham, born in Glasgow, so I have a different paradigm. I have 2 questions. One of them is, there was a recent announcement, I can't remember the source, it was in all of the papers recently, about Spain acknowledging the return of Jews.
And Portugal. Right.
That's the first question. The second question is, are you familiar with a book called When Scotland Was Jewish?
No.
Well, it might be worthwhile as part of the research, because it could be a very controversial thing, and as a documentarist I'm very interested in perhaps exploring that, because they trace the conversos, the crypto-Jews, at the same time of the expulsion from England in the 1290s.
Right.
That there was some connection at a DNA level with Jews that left England, and instead of going east to Europe and going to Poland and so forth, they went north and they became crypto-Jews. And I think it could be quite controversial actually, because Scotland is a little country, has a population that have about 5 million people for a long time, has so many inventions, so many universities, and so many thoughts about it, and merchants, and the whole country, and if you look at in the evidence, John Knox, the father of the Reformation movement or the Reform movement, the closest interpretation of the Bible or the Hebrew Bible is in that. And if you look at some of his paintings, he looks like a Sephardic Yid.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. See, I told you, it's going to be like that Tisha B'Av I had. We're going to get testimonies, and I don't know when they close the doors here. Yes?
I would like to know if there is a position or participation of Sephardic rabbis in this matter. What is there? Because I am from Peru.
Yes.
And the Sephardic rabbi is the most difficult, the person that would not convert anybody,
Right.
and totally opposes everything.
He reminds me of the Jew that's so kosher he doesn't eat in his own home. It is a reality that many, they hold on. The Sephardic are the toughest, truthfully, because they feel that if anyone left Judah, they don't care that they were forced to leave, but you left, you started getting yourself involved with Christianity, you're not authentic, you never will be. I can't speak for the people that have that mentality. I only know about them, and they're a big problem. Yeah.
Hey, Rabbi. I'm a Jamaican Jew. I brought two of my cousins. They're also Jamaican Jews. We're from the same family.
Yes.
Our family has been in Jamaica from the 1530s. Their ancestors were Moranos.
Right.
And I guess we were fortunate enough that our family kept their tradition as Jews, because that's what we are today. And but the community did lose a lot of the Jewish culture and a lot of the Jewish people to the community because of the intermarriages.
Yes.
So I guess we were fortunate in that respect. Now, I just wanted you to know that we found your talk very informative and interesting, and I think that the work that you're doing is priceless.
Thank you.
I think we're getting towards the end. One more question here?
One more question.
Okay. Yes. Do we have any knowledge of what waves of immigration to the New World the crypto Jews were most prevalent on? Say the early 1500s, the late 1500s. Is any of that known?
It's known. It's not. Again, it's not my field of expertise. We go back to Columbus, who was obviously, the question is, was he, wasn't he? I think he was. I can't answer that. I'm not. Again, it's not my field of expertise. Sorry.
I think that's all we have time to have questions.
Sure.
We certainly have heard from a very interesting rabbi who went from New Jersey to Texas and whose life's changed. So that's a very interesting transformation for any rabbi.
Just a final word of thanks and appreciation. I think everybody here did learn a great deal tonight. We're delighted that you came out. I can also add there are communities that are being educated, supported, assisted, and ultimately converted also in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. So there are probably communities we haven't named tonight that you may be aware of others. We'd love to hear about it, or where you think there's an interest. Again, reach out to Kulano, because we do have people that will help and assist. So Rabbi, thank you for coming all the way to Toronto so you can enjoy our weather.
Thank you.
And our community. And we do, in fact, thank you for introducing Darcei Noam to the notion of welcoming the Anistim back on Tisha B'Av, which we do now for about 5 years. And I invite you all to come and be part of that. We don't need to say that it's the saddest day and nobody comes to shul. It's actually quite a wonderful service. Thank you. And thank you to your wife Sharon for joining us too.